Tan Tock Seng Hospital will not allow visitors into its wards until further notice after a nurse and 8 others linked to her test positive for Covid-19.
The housewife who tortured her Myanmar maid to her death gets a new lawyer as part of legal moves to avoid life imprisonment.
From the pandemic and gun violence to China and taxing the rich, US President Joe Biden addresses Congress as he marks 100 days in office. You're watching The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Quay.
I'm Hariam Tudiman. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. 16 new locally transmitted COVID-19 cases were reported today, the highest in more than 9 months. Among them, 8 are linked to the Filipino nurse who works at Tan Tock Seng Hospital.
These 8 cases were detected during the Health Ministry's proactive testing of patients and staff in the affected ward. Now, all staff working in the hospital's wards will also be tested.
Another 7 of the new local cases are family members of the 38-year-old ICA officer deployed at Changi Airport Terminal 1. They had been placed on quarantine earlier. Now, no details were given on the remaining community case.
There are also 19 imported cases today. More details will be released later tonight.
Meanwhile, visitors are not allowed in the wards at TTSH until further notice.
Well, this following yesterday's discovery of a possible COVID-19 cluster at the hospital where a nurse, doctor and 3 patients tested positive for the virus.
Multimedia correspondent Sam Jo is at TTSH now with the latest. We have Sam Jo there. Hi Sam Jo. Now Sam Jo, you've been there for a few hours. What have you observed? We know visitors are not allowed in the wards, but what else is being done to socially distance inpatients and outpatients as well as staff?
That's right, Jan. We've been here for quite a few hours now. We are obviously not allowed in because we are neither visitors nor outpatients, nor patients. But what we have observed is that, social distancing is still very much in place, with all the measures outside. People have to queue up before they can go in, have to do their safe entry. What we do know, though, so on the surface, it looks pretty normal, business as usual, as per COVID measures. But if you look closer, you can actually see that they've put up a new sign which indicates that no visitors are allowed. All right, and this sign only went up earlier today, literally a few hours ago, before the new rule was introduced. And we also managed to speak to some outpatients and visitors who were coming out of the building, and they shared with us that staff who are not rostered, who are not working in Ward 9D, or Ward 9, in fact, are actually not allowed up to the ward at all. Right? This is an added precautionary measure that we were informed of. And we also managed to speak to some visitors like retiree Madam Emily Lee. She's a 66-year-old woman who was here to visit her husband early in the day when visitors were still allowed. And she noticed that lines were way longer. She had to wait 45 minutes in line instead of the usual 10 minutes because people at the counter had to explain the new visiting rules to visitors and people who were hoping to enter the hospital, right? And last night when she found out the news that there was, there were some cases at Tan Tock Seng Hospital, she was quite worried because her husband is currently warded in the hospital. But then she subsequently has shared that, she's not that worried anymore because she believes that she managed to visit her husband earlier today to see that he was okay. And she also believes that the doctors and nurses and all the staff at Tan Tock Seng pretty much have things under control.
Well, Sam Jo, one of the 3 patients who was confirmed as a COVID-19 case yesterday is a 72-year-old woman, and I understand that you spoke to her as well. So how is she, and what else did she tell you?
That's right, Olivia. The 72-year-old patient that I spoke to is Madam Ong. Managed to get on the phone earlier with her today. She seems to be doing fine. For the most part, she was admitted to Ward 9D last Tuesday, so that's April the 20th, all right, for rheumatoid arthritis. And she came down, unfortunately, with a fever on Sunday, and she also developed a cough. The fever and cough subsequently subsided, but then it came back again, and that's when they decided to test her, and that's when she tested positive yesterday. So currently, she's she's isolated in a ward, and she's very well taken care of. She says her fever has subsided. thankfully, but she still feels nauseous. Her legs are weak. She said that just today she lost her sense of taste. She was eating some meat and vegetables earlier for lunch, and she found that she couldn't taste them all of a sudden. And Madam Ong also has a habit of applying medicated oil on herself sometimes, and she said that when she did it today, she could only smell a little bit, despite the aroma of the oil being strong, very strong usually. And she also complains of a bit of tightness in her chest and body aches. But for the most part, despite going through all these symptoms, and being down with COVID, she didn't seem. She seemed more concerned about others. She was concerned about her family members who came to visit her in the ward earlier this week, who are currently on quarantine. And she was also very, very worried about the doctors and nurses who were in close contact with her, particularly those who helped her to go to the toilet when she was in Ward 9D, right, in Tan Tock Seng Hospital, because she was informed as a patient that as a patient, she could actually take off her masks. And so that's what she did. Right now she's worried that maybe she could have possibly passed the virus on to other people. So she's very, very worried and concerned about the safety of others more than herself. And she would like to take this opportunity at the same time also to thank all the doctors and nurses at Tan Tock Seng Hospital and who are currently taking care of her, and to remind everyone to not let their guard down and to continue taking all the necessary precautions against COVID-19.
Right. Well, Samjo, thank you very much for that update. That was multimedia correspondent Yo Samjo reporting live from Tan Tock Seng Hospital.
Meanwhile, several experts here said that the possible cluster at TTSH is of concern, but there's no need to be overly worried. This situation is a reminder that hospitals are vulnerable and infection control needs to be taken extremely seriously.
Professor Dale Fisher, a senior infectious diseases consultant, spoke to us on the measures in place at hospitals to manage such an outbreak.
This requires an outbreak response in its own right. So you need to identify all the possible cases through a fairly massive testing program, I would imagine, and do a lot of contact tracing. So anyone that's determined to be a contact, whether it's a staff or a patient or a visitor, will need to be tested. And after that, whether they're negative or not, negative or positive, they'll need to be in isolation or quarantine. If they're negative, then the testing will go on perhaps a couple of times over 14 days during their quarantine, so that if they're positive, we can do sort of another layer of contact tracing. So this is the huge challenge ahead of people that are managing the Tan Tock Seng outbreak. There'll need to be a lot of limitation of movement. We won't be admitting patients into new patients into hotspots, so there'll need to be support from other hospitals, staff that work there, as well as other hospitals. That will be limited, as it was earlier on in Singapore's broader response. There'll probably be some scaling up of PPE during this period where there may have been some transmission. I'd have confidence that this will come under control, but it's going to be extremely demanding on staff and patients and their needs, and making sure that those needs are still met while there's a COVID response happening in that sort of focused area. And hopefully there won't be any spread to other areas where contacts may have gone.
In other local headlines, the woman who starved and tortured her Myanmar maid to death has changed lawyers and is making further moves to avoid life in prison. Gayathiri Murugayan was due to be sentenced today, but it emerged during the hearing that she had changed lawyers last month. Her new lawyer confirmed that she was not retracting her guilty plea, but asked for time to file a further mitigation plea to support her case that her culpability was reduced. The case is tentatively fixed to be mentioned in court again on June 22nd.
Football fans, it'll cost you less to watch Euro 2020 matches, but you must sign up early with the participating telcos. Singtel and StarHub are partnering on-demand streaming service Live Now to secure broadcast rights here. And if you sign up before June the 1st, you only need to pay a one-time charge of $83 on Singtel and $84 on StarHub, a drop from the $88 subscription fee for Euro 2016.
Looking overseas, Joe Biden is marking his 100th day as U.S. president, and he's sprinted through signing a $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill into law and issuing more executive orders so far than his three predecessors.
His administration has also delivered 200 million COVID-19 vaccinations, and these moves have resulted in a positive and steady approval rating for the president.
Our U.S. Bureau Chief is standing by to take stock of Mr. Biden's 100 days. But first, on the eve of that milestone, in a speech to a joint session of Congress, he proposed a sweeping new $1.8 trillion plan.
And to help pay for it, he pleaded with lawmakers on both sides to agree to raise taxes on corporations and wealthy Americans.
Mr. Biden argued that his proposals represent a once-in-a-generation investment vital to the country's future and necessary to keep up with China.
We'll see more technological change in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 50. That's how rapidly artificial intelligence and so much more is changing. And we're falling behind the competition with the rest of the world. Decades ago, we used to invest 2% of our gross domestic product in America, 2% of our gross domestic product in research and development. Today, Mr. Secretary, that's less than 1%. China and other countries are closing in fast. We have to develop and dominate the products and technologies of the future. Advanced batteries, biotechnology, computer chips, clean energy.
Well, Mr. Biden also called on Congress to pass police reforms, and he wanted this done by the anniversary of the killing of George Floyd, which falls on May the 25th.
It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death.
But all eyes were on the women behind Mr. Biden. Even before he began his speech, Vice President Kamala Harris and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on the dais, the first time in U.S. history that two women sat behind the president.
The Straits Times' U.S. Bureau Chief Nurul Ghosh is here to discuss Mr. Biden's Congress address and his first 100 days as president. So, Nurul, what were the most important points that Mr. Biden brought up in his congressional address?
Well, right at the outset, it was hugely symbolic, one has to say, that behind him as he spoke and on either side were two women for the first time ever in the history of the American presidency. And those were, of course, Vice President Kamala Harris and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. So, of course, President Biden brought up the pandemic. He urged all Americans to get vaccinated. As we know, even as vaccinations pick up, there is still vaccine skepticism. So he made that pitch. He spoke about the need to compete and how nobody should bet against America, that Americans can do anything if they decide to do it together. That was in the context of the pain that America has been through with this pandemic and with political and racial divisions, but also in the context of competition with China. China is closing in, he said, and significantly he said that he had told President Xi Jinping in their phone call that America will compete, but he does not want conflict, that he in fact wants to prevent conflict. He made a long and strong pitch for raising taxes on the wealthy. He cited a lot of data on that, including a study that shows that 55 of the nation's biggest corporations paid zero in federal income tax last year. No federal taxes on more than 40 billion US dollars in profits. And he stressed that the 2017 tax cuts had basically benefited the rich, and it is time to close that gap. And he spoke about social justice as well, about the need to enhance controls on guns. But the big message was that the challenges call for a new era of government spending, and that government is a force for good, not some hostile entity thousands of miles away. The government is us, he said. It is we, the people. This is very significant, as we know, because distrust of the federal government runs very deep. It is part of the DNA of the United States. So on that theme, he made a strong pitch for a vast expansion of social safety nets, educational programs, promising that the government will create jobs and opportunities for those left behind. He said trickle-down economics never worked. It wasn't Wall Street that built America, it was the middle class, and it was unions that built the middle class. So it was a pitch to blue-collar America, really, in the hope that there will be common ground. And he also stressed that America must prove that democracy still works, that its government still works, and it can deliver for the American people.
As in usual practice, the other party delivers a response, and in this case we saw Senator Tim Scott, the only black GOP senator, follow up with a speech. What do you make of it? Did it signal a building or mending of bridges between Republicans and Democrats?
Well, in short, no. The two sides could not be further apart still. Senator Tim Scott was a good choice. As you said, he is a rising star. He's black. He has a compelling personal story, raised by a single mother. He dwelt on that. And he is the Republican foil to arguments that there is racism in America. He hammered Joe Biden's infrastructure plan as too broad. He said Joe Biden is driving the nation further apart, that he supports abortion, that he believes Americans are racist when they are not, that he has weakened the southern border, that his plans to raise taxes will kill jobs. He said the coronavirus is on the run and it is time to get back to normal schooling for children, to normal life, and so forth. So pretty much the opposite of everything Joe Biden said, or to put it another way, that everything Joe Biden said was wrong, basically.
Namal, of course, Mr. Biden's address in Congress was primarily for Americans, but it also has global impact and resonance. And so, what should non-Americans take from what Mr. Biden said earlier today?
Right, so Joe Biden's strategy is to rebuild America at home, which will strengthen America globally. That is the theory. But he wants to build back better, to use his phrase. He wants to retool America to deal with the crises of our times, the pandemic, of course, and climate change, and also great power competition with China and Russia. And he is a believer in America's alliances. He mentioned that as well. He wants to project strength in order to avoid conflict, and America can only do that if it is not divided at home, if it is strong and cohesive at home. So he wants to project strength abroad, but not in a reckless manner, rather in a more measured manner. He has restored an element of traditional diplomatic engagement, and he's also a believer in the idea of America, in principles. He mentioned that as well, which is why human rights is back at the center of policy, both at home and abroad.
Let's take stock, Nirmal. Let's take a wider look at Mr. Biden's first 100 days. In terms of following through with campaign promises, in what areas did he meet those targets? And at the same time as well, where did he fall short?
Well, he has succeeded, of course, in accelerating the vaccine rollout, which is a big thing. He did succeed in his COVID relief measure that put $1,400 in the bank accounts of lower income Americans. He drove that through the Senate using the one-vote majority. He has fallen short on promises to raise the minimum wage, but that is an ongoing project, given the slim majorities they have in Congress. Raising the minimum wage, raising taxes on the wealthy, all this will have to be negotiated. He is falling short on gun control, but frankly, that is also to be expected. That is also an ongoing project. He, of course, returned the US to the WHO, the World Health Organization, as promised, and to the Paris Climate Accord. He halted troop withdrawals from Germany, and he has enforced America's key alliances, which is what he promised to do. The one big promise to heal a divided nation remains a challenge, and there is a long way to go. the nation remains severely divided, and that is going to remain a problem. He has less than 2 years in which to push through his agenda and show results. Most importantly, politically, to show more jobs and economic growth. Now, the IMF has said America will grow 6% in the rebound from the pandemic. But if it does not, then he will have problems to deal with, because around this time next year, focus will shift to the midterm elections, in which the incumbent party normally loses seats. So he himself personally doesn't have to care much about re-election in 2024. He's 78 years old, and he has positioned himself as a transitional president, and now he is positioning or trying to be a transformational president. But he has, again, less than 2 years to do it in a country where even if his approval rating is fairly good, and it is running at 53% or over, again, it remains severely divided ideologically between left and right, between liberal and conservative, between urban and rural. Very deep divisions.
Thanks for the insights, Nirmal. Nirmal Ghosh, our US Bureau Chief in Washington, D.C.
He's written several stories as part of the Straits Times' coverage of Mr. Biden's 100 days. That's in today's paper.
So, from Joe Biden to another American for this week's Live Picks, American artist Dale Chihuly. That's not a name most of us are familiar with, but his glass sculptures are all over Singapore.
That's right, including many hotels like the Fullerton, Ritz-Carlton and Resorts World Sentosa, and now at Gardens by the Bay as well, where 140 works are displayed in Chihuly's first major garden exhibition in Asia.
Ahead of its official opening on Saturday, senior culture correspondent Ong Sofen is here to share more. Hello Sofen. The Gardens by the Bay showcase includes 25 large-scale sculptures. These are intricate works of art. I have to ask, how on earth did they make their way all the way from the US to right here, Gardens by the Bay?
The Chihuly Studios is actually based in Seattle. So the Seattle is also home to Amazon.com. So it actually took a while for the sculptures to get shipped out because, as you know, last year was pandemic year. So everybody was buying stuff from Amazon. So the shipment actually got delayed for a few weeks in Seattle before it made it out of Seattle. Then along the way, it did a stopover in China. So the organizers were kind of worried that it would get stuck in China over Chinese New Year. But all the boxes arrived in Singapore in March. And the Chihuly Studios also sent a team of 11 of their experts to Singapore to help install all these large-scale installations. So they had to go through quarantine before they helped set up all the sculptures around the gardens.
Wow, sounds like really quite an undertaking.
Yeah.
So, Sofen, I'm actually quite a big fan of Chihuly. I've seen, his sculptures at Ritz-Carlton, for example, and I've also been to the Bellagio in Vegas, where, in the lobby there's this beautiful sculpture on the ceiling. So, I have plans to go to Gardens by the Bay to check this out. So, what are the key pieces that I can look out for?
I think that each of the conservatories has a very beautiful star centerpiece. For the flower domes, you need to look out for the floral field centerpiece, which actually incorporates 3 Chihuly sculptures, and the plants around it are actually planted to echo the colors. So you've got like begonias and hydrangeas, and they're all very pretty in pinks and purples. And in the Cloud Forest Dome, there's this really absolutely stunning piece that's kind of like 10 meters, which is like about 3 stories high, and it's hung off of a 5-story, at 5 stories up. So it's actually the first time that a Chihuly piece has been hung next to a waterfall. So once you walk into the Cloud Forest Dome, there's this like stunning visual. But actually my favorites are outdoors. There are these 2 sculpture works that are actually installed on ponds. So the ethereal white Persians at the Serene Garden Pond is really quite stunning because they darken the water with ink so that there's this perfect reflection of the white sculpture that looks like lilies in the water itself. So it's a perfect Instagram moment.
Well, thanks very much, Sofa. Now, I've already made arrangements to go and see it with my family. Dale Chihuli Glass in Bloom officially opens on Saturday.
More admission details can be found at Gardens by the Bay's website. I should also mention that you can use your Singapore Rediscover vouchers.
That's right. Well, next up, the jalanjalan.me website that offers curated online guides for hidden food gems and small businesses in neighborhoods like Jalan Besar, Ang Mo Kio, Bedok, Chong Pang and Clemency. You can even choose what to focus on. Do, eat, shop and see.
Our colleague Eunice Quek is here, and as a food correspondent, she naturally went for the eating option. Well, Eunice, tell us more about the idea behind these guides. And I understand you've been on the food-centric tour of Jalan Besar. How was your experience?
Well, so the guides, like you guys mentioned, are meant to actually get you started on exploring your neighborhood. Checking out, what's some hidden gems, small businesses, get some idea of like maybe their heritage as well. So actually to give us, kind of a sense of what the guides offer, that's why I was taken on a hosted tour of Jalan Besar. It was actually really fun exploring the area, meeting the local business owners. Some of them, kind of gave us a bit of insight into their businesses. That was really nice. And of course, well, like you mentioned, my focus mainly on eating. So some highlights for me were actually the soba at Rewa Soba, the pao making at Chin Sin Huan, which is actually run by the second generation of the Tanjong Ru Bao establishment. And well, we had a nice round off at with some tiramisu at the Tiramisu Hero Cafe, a cafe that I haven't been to in a while.
Right. So, Eunice, you went on a guided tour, as you mentioned, but, for somebody like Jan and myself, we just have to rely solely on the website. So is that easy to navigate?
Well, yes, you can follow the pins on the map. Click on each of them. They'll give you a brief description of the location. Or you can actually go through the different categories that you mentioned, the do, shop, see, and eat. And like we established, I've paid too much attention to the eating part, but that is not all that the site offers. It's more than just food stops. And if you don't know where to start, you can always download a sample half-day itinerary, and they can, kind of get you started on what to do and where to go.
Thanks for sharing more on jalanjalan.me, Eunice. That was food correspondent Eunice Quek.
And on to possibly your next binge when it comes to Korean dramas. We're talking about Sell Your Haunted House, which stars Tang Nara as a realtor who can exorcise spirits from haunted properties.
Meanwhile, Jong Yong-hwa, a singer but no stranger to acting, plays a con man. He pretends to chase away spirits with scientific methods in order to swindle money.
The title, Sell Your Haunted House, tells you the gist of its story, but journalist Jan Lee is here to share more. Jan, you've written a brief review of Sell Your Haunted House, describing it as horror with heart. Can you elaborate on that?
So as you mentioned, the crux of the story, she's a real estate agent, and then she goes into haunted properties and she helps to exorcise the place, basically. So you actually get the stories of the ghosts as well. At least in the episode that I watched, there was a pretty touching backstory to the ghost that was haunting the property, because he had died after a massive failed investment. And then he basically haunts the place, and there's a bit of a mystery there as well to uncover, how did he die, because it was him and his friend both died, and then you find out that actually he didn't kill himself, because everyone thought that it was a suicide situation after the failed investment, but it was actually one of the guys killed the other guy. And then you find out why they want to haunt this place, because they have regrets, or they have things that they cannot let go of, things that they wish they said to their family that they did not say to their family, and so on. So there's actually quite a bit of human interest in even the ghost stories as well.
Right. Well, that sounds very interesting already, Jen. But what else makes this series so binge-worthy for you?
Okay, so I watch it on View, and I'm not sure whether the episodes are cut up on View, but it makes it easier to watch because usually like K-drama, the episodes are very long, you know, which is one of the things that sort of it detracts, like, how do I say, like, it makes me less willing to commit as much time to each episode when I see that it's like 70 minutes, and then I would just be like, do I have 70 minutes to spend today just sitting here and watching this entire episode for 70 minutes? But like on View, the episodes are about like 30 minutes each. So I suspect that overall the episode count will be larger because the episodes are cut into smaller bits. But it does make it easier to digest, and it makes it easier for me to be like, okay, today I'll just watch one, and then maybe tomorrow I can watch another one, or maybe when I'm having dinner then I can watch another one, you know. So it's in a bit easily digestible bits, and also it doesn't hurt that I've always like had a thing for Jung Yong-hwa since he was in CN Blue, and he's like the lead singer, and like, you know, in here he shows off his body with this like great swimming pool scene, so that doesn't hurt. Yeah.
Well, you know, I can really relate to the part where Jen says, you know, 70 minutes, whether I can spend, yeah, so I prefer...
Who has that kind of time now, right?
Exactly. In any case, also, I'm a huge fan of horror, you know, genre. Yeah, so probably I'll catch that. Well, thank you so much, Jen. You can watch Sell Your Haunted House on the View streaming service. As we wrap up today's live picks, remember there is tomorrow's Friday section if you want more.
For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Harianto Diman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on A Big Story.